to look past that. And so that becomes the relationship. Um, Other things to kind of think about are things about the environment, particularly with people living with dementia, because one of the things that happens even more and more with people living with dementia is a filtering kind of thing that I may there may be background noise, there may be a TV on, there may be kids and dogs and radios and things going out in the street that I, with my brain, can filter. But for the person living with dementia, all they hear is the furnace running. All they hear is the overhead page. So they may not be able to filter those kinds of things. So the more you can reduce your need to compete with that, the better off you're going to be. So this is the GEMS approach, which is looking at um, how dementia changes through time, how we change maybe in a day-to-day kind of thing. Um, Claudia Allen is an occupational therapist, and she developed this approach. And Teepa Snow took some, and I did some work with it, and then Teepa associated it with GEM states. So just to go through it pretty quickly, we've got 6 different gem states. The first one is sapphires, and that's you and me on a good day when you're flexible and you can adapt and you can see your perspective, but you can see other people's perspectives, and you can really truly value other people's needs and abilities. Well, that's not going to happen very often in our days, because very few people can be in the situation of of dealing with abuse, neglect, and exploitation and be a sapphire. So we're not going to see that very often. The next gen state are people who are diamonds. They're rigid. They still have language, but they've lost a lot of their ability to be flexible with that language. They get very concrete. So I have some specific kinds of strategies for this. And because what we'll often tend to do is try to explain, and what what it feels like is we're arguing with the person. So if I say to somebody, if I say to Stephanie, would you unmute for a minute for me? Because you've talked with me before. You've unmuted and talked with me. So
Do you hear me?
yeah. So if Stephanie is the person living with dementia, and I say to her, well, Stephanie, when we talked last time, this is what you said, and now you're telling me something different. How are you going to feel about me?
That you are not understanding me and that you're scolding me.
That I'm scolding you, that I don't understand you? Are you accusing me of lying? I would never
Yeah.
lie. What do you mean you're accused? I would never say anything like that. I said my grandson did that. I would never say my, so who's been talking bad about my grandson? And so they,
Or
to
they'd say, I don't appreciate you talking to me that way.
I don't appreciate you talking to me that way. So that letting go of needing to be right and saying the magic words, and the first set of magic words we're going to use, I'm going to have you put them in the chat so I make sure you remember them. I'm sorry, and you can actually say them with me. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I
I'm
didn't mean to.
I'm so very sorry, because if you don't say those words, you will be. And so letting go of needing to be right, and letting go of, you told me this and now you're telling me this, and so, oh, I'm sorry, I had the understanding that this, but let's keep going, and then it might come back out a little bit later. So those I'm sorry's will get you out of so much trouble. So oops, wrong way. The next gem state are emeralds, and these are people who are living in the past. And the challenge with them sometimes is they start remembering things from the past and overlapping it with the future, time traveling, and get really um, confused with that. For the ember people, they're really living in the moment. So they don't have a lot of language. They are using their hands. So a lot of times you can see their distress, but by how much they're doing with their hands. So they get really fidgety and they get really, yep. Well, you. When maybe one family member comes in the room and you see them starting to get a little fidgety, a little more distressed, kind of notice those kinds of things. Rubies are people who are living in that bubble. They don't have language. So you can ask them all day long and the words just, you might get a, yep, or hep. But language is not going to work. There again, it's going to be more of that whole body kind of pulling away. For people in that pearl state, these are people who are really living inside themselves. They're still there, um, but their world is very small and they're still really living inside themselves. So they might have a moment where the blinds come up and they're there, but we're really looking at outside things for them. So we've talked a little bit about this exploitation things. Um, we've talked a little bit about that kind of risk. So let's spend some time. I know I'm getting close on time talking about identifying abuse. And so what I'm really looking for is things on that don't make sense, things on the physical exam that look inconsistent with what the explanation is. But it gets complicated because my folks are changing. Something as simple as, I'm going to ask everybody to stand up for a minute. So if everybody will stand up for a minute and put your hands out to the side. So that's normal vision for somebody age 25. Move your hands into about 90 degrees. That's normal vision for somebody at age 80. Put your hands like this. This is vision for somebody who is in that diamond state. So when we get down to this, we get down to this emerald state, we're now looking at people who have dramatic vision changes. And so they may have really dramatic falls downstairs that look like they must have been pushed, because nobody would just ever just fall downstairs head over heel like that. But with this vision, you don't see the stairs, things might happen. So really looking for those consistencies, looking for those inconsistencies, and paying attention to um, things on the physical exam. People, the kinds of things I look for those classic kinds of things like bruises. I look for the classic kinds of things like skin tears, because the difference, what I'm looking for is something that most kind of accident kinds of things happen on one side, but not on the other. So if someone bumps against the table, they may have a skin tear right here, but they're not likely to have that skin tear in the same place on the other arm. And that to me makes it look like that person was grabbed and there was some twisting going on with the skin, because people rarely bump themselves in the same place at the same on bilaterally. So I look for things that are more bilateral. That makes me more concerned about the possibility of abuse. I look for things that are at different. So someone had a bad fall, and they've got new things on them, but they've also got a lot of old injuries. That makes me more worried that there might be abuse going on. Part of the real challenge is that people living with dementia are telling the truth. They're telling the truth as they understand it. And I wish there was a way I could give you, a truth serum, to kind of weed out what is actual and what is kind of confabulation and what is kind of misinterpretation. Um, but it's really hard to dig through those stories because people are really just trying to make sense of what's going on around them. So some strategies that can be helpful are really making that relationship be looking at making that connection, getting into that position where you're sitting beside the person, thinking about mask. Also really allowing for pause, because people living with dementia often take more time to process. So they often take more time to really be able to respond. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds. I've got my timer set for 10 seconds. People living with dementia, you can ask them a question and it sometimes might take up to 10, up to 20, up to 30 seconds to respond. So I'm gonna, Stephanie is unmuted. So I'm going to ask her, and Stephanie, I have a feeling this might be hard for you, but I'm going to ask you to not respond to me until my timer goes off. Okay.
Okay.
So Stephanie, is this place, okay? Okay, so that was 10 seconds. How long did that feel?
It felt like 5 minutes to me because,
It
I'm so responsive.
it feels like 5 minutes. So typically what happens in that 10 seconds, if we've already asked what?
If we've already asked, how do you like this place or how is this place? Your first thing I would say if I were on that side is I'd say, well, the food's not good and
Yeah.
they don't come every time I ring the bell or whatever.
Yeah. And so me as the interviewer, I might say, how is this place? And then the person doesn't answer. And so I move on to the next question, or I ask that question again, or I rephrase that question and ask it again. And so it's like the timer restarts every time. So it's
And
like,
that makes it longer and frustrating.
and we never get to the answer. Whereas that person, particularly in that diamond state, might be coming up with the language, coming up to see if they can trust you enough to really answer that question. So just being aware that 10 seconds is a really short period of time. So I'm a nurse. I have taken pulses forever. I'm pretty good at counting time. I also am the mom of a son who played soccer. So I am used to counting down how many seconds are left in this half or this game. So I count to myself, or if I'm really anxious, I'll kind of do my finger on my leg and count the seconds to make sure I'm giving that person enough time to really respond to those questions. So giving that time is really hard and really important. So let's go back to see if we can pick up a couple of more tips, knowing that I'm going to finish up in a couple of minutes and give you some time for some questions. And that kind of goes along with don't interrupt, when the person is processing. If they don't answer in 10 or 20 seconds, they probably lost the question. I'm also going to look for people to become physically withdrawn. So I'm going to look for people. We've been chatting, things are going well. I ask the question that kind of gets and their body language changes, their words change. I'm looking for those kinds of things. I'm looking for emotions and behaviors, because I'm going to assume that if a person is expressing that they don't feel safe, there's reason why they don't feel safe. And maybe they're not being physically abused, but maybe they're being yelled at, or maybe there are other reasons why they don't feel safe in this situation. That relationship is really important, and thinking about the environment, thinking about preferred name. That's why I will say, if I'm asking Stephanie, or I'm asking Laura, I'll say, hey. So I'll ask Laura to unmute for a second.
Sorry, it took me a second to find the button again.
Happens. Hey, it's Melanie, and you are?
I'm Laura.
Laura. So now I know she wants me to call her Laura. So that's how I know if she wants me to call her Laura or Mrs. or Doctor or whatever. So that kind of gives me that little hint. What makes a difference? You know, there's not a lot of research out there for a difference in dementia and abuse. There's some attitudes, beliefs that education makes a difference. There's some attitudes and beliefs that support makes a difference, that resources make a difference. But it's really complicated, especially when it comes to things like respite. Maybe that helps. Maybe it makes a huge difference. That's certainly one of the things that I've been hearing from my community is, I'm about done. You know, he used to be an adult day program, 20 hours a week. And now that he's with me, you know, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, it is too much togetherness. I am done. I need help. I need out of here. So that's when I start looking, because the risk factors for this kind of elder abuse are often different. You often don't have families with a history of mental health issues, with a history of physical violence or drug and alcohol abuse. Often the families that I am dealing with are families who've never had this ever happen in their lives before. Life gets complicated and resources get limited and distress happens. And so sometimes with the people that I spend a lot of time with, I really wind up thinking, what really is safe? Is what's safe for them to be in this situation with some resources, with some support, with some education, or is it something different? So being aware, being grateful, working with your colleagues. But what it comes down to for me is, I call it that tickle in the back of my head, you know, that tickle in the back of my brain that tells me something is wrong. And the majority of the time when I get the tickle in the back of my brain that tells me something's wrong, when I keep exploring and I keep asking questions and I find what it is. So I want to thank y'all for choosing to be in this breakout. I want to thank y'all for being so responsive, for doing the work you do. I've got about 2 minutes. I need 2 hours, Laura. Laura, I need 2 hours. Don't leave the breakout room. I've got 2 minutes. No, do what you need to do. But I am going to hang around as long as they'll let me, if you want to ask some questions or if you have some comments.
Well, Melanie, do you have an email address maybe if people could reach out to you? Would that be okay to share an email address if people have questions that we didn't get to?
Absolutely. I'll put it in the chat. It's melanie.bunn@yahoo.com.
And is the Melanie with a capital M?
It's lower, but Yahoo doesn't seem to be real picky. Melanie.bunn@yahoo. Oops. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. We really, really appreciate your time. So many helpful tips there. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. And if I can help with anything, just reach out.
All right, so if folks want to go ahead and leave the breakout room, we have a quick break from 2 to 2:15, and then from 2:15 to 3:15, we have our afternoon keynote, Michelle Gorino, who is going to present on trauma-informed care plus decisional ability aware interviewing. So should be a great presentation. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you there.
Thank you. Hi, Chris. Bye.
And get you a quick water break and come back in. So Autumn, I'm going to let you start the slideshow for the afternoon area. Welcome back from the break. At this time, I'm going to ask Tadra Martin to turn on her camera and her mic so that she can introduce our afternoon keynote speaker. Tadra, I think you may be muted still, so. Tadra apparently is not having any audio, so I am actually going to grab the little flyer here and let me introduce Michelle for you this afternoon. Michelle Guarino, this presentation will provide training on how individuals can employ trauma-informed care when interviewing individuals who have been abused or have trauma. She will explain trauma-informed is how and how to infuse it in their work. Also, she will discuss things to look for to determine an individual's decisional ability awareness. A senior lecturer for the North Carolina State University School of Social Work, Michelle Guarino earned a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and a Master of Social Work from NYU, New York University. Michelle is a licensed clinical social worker and has worked with gang-affiliated high-risk youth and families since 1996. Michelle began her career as a youth intervention counselor for the New Hanover County Sheriff/Wilmington City Police Gang Task Force, a first-of-its-kind position employing a civilian within law enforcement entity to intervene with gangs and gang members and families. Michelle has developed numerous successful prevention, intervention, diversion, and reentry programs that subsequently were recognized with multiple awards and accolades. Michelle's 23-year work history has focused on working with law enforcement settings and has held titles such as Division Commander, Program Director, Gang Counselor, Crisis Unit Supervisor, and Crisis Negotiation Team. So Michelle, at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. I am going to share my screen with you guys, and hopefully we can get started. If you cannot see that, just let me know. Awesome. Awesome. You know, when Kevin was reading that, anytime that I know lots of us speak at conferences and things, you hear this laundry list of accomplishments and things you've done. And sometimes it just speaks to me that, wow, I am getting old. So thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that validation of my age. So we're going to talk a little bit about creating a trauma-informed care environment. And for some of you, this may be new information, and for others, this may be a duplication of something you've heard. It also may sound incredibly simple. And what I've found working with trauma is there is not this standardized training that many agencies are offering their employees. There's not this trauma-informed approach that many universities are taking as we're training counselors and psychologists and social workers. So I think one of the best things to do is to start very simple and go through information at a very slow and standard rate, if you will. So trauma-informed care, what it is, and what you'll find is there's a lot of words and a lot of writing here for those of you who like to take notes, and for also those of you who want this presentation. It's a good piece of material to refer back to. But really, trauma-informed care is talking about the agency, the program, the organization, how we advocate, how we lobby, what the community thinks, the stereotypes that are around someone who is a survivor, and how we respond. How do we take the individual's needs and their personal experiences into how we're working with them, from the front desk staff of an agency to those clinicians working directly with them. One thing that is the most important is that there has to be a realization that the trauma is widespread, that it impacts so many facets of a person's life. We have to recognize the signs, the symptoms in trauma, and how that affects secondary and tertiary parts of that particular person's life. We have to know how to respond. We have to have the patience. We have to be able to walk alongside. We have to be able to ask the question, what have you been through? We have to incorporate trauma into our policies, our protocols, our procedures, how it is that we respond, how it is that we start to work with the individual with a trauma-informed lens. And we are always seeking to actively resist re-traumatization. And we want to create an environment where re-traumatization is less likely to occur. So if you know a little bit about trauma-informed care, you will know that there are tons of different concepts around what it is and how to deliver it. This is one of my favorite ways to look at trauma-informed care, and it breaks it down into 6 kind of silos where we can start to look at if we are doing this and in what way, and if not, where's the challenges and how we're meeting these people where they are. The first is safety. Throughout the whole organization, staff and the people and clients that we serve, we have to make sure that we are meeting them in an environment that is physically safe, psychologically safe, and that they feel that this is a space where they can be comforted and start to disclose things when they're ready. We have to create a space full of transparency and trustworthiness. We want to work these into our daily operations, how we communicate with everyone that works in the organization, as well as the clients and their families. We want to build the goal of trust. We want to maintain trust, not only with those that we are serving, but those that they are describing as a support system. Peer support and mutual self-help. These are integral to the organization and service delivery approach. We have to make sure that we have these components so that they feel empowered, they feel advocated for, and that there's the ability for them to reach out to build their coping skills to be able to self-help. Collaboration and mutuality. There is a recognition that healing happens in relationships that are meaningful, sharing of power and decision-making. We all know as clinicians that this is one of our ethical values. We have a client right of self-determination. We mutually meet clients where they are. Goals and objectives, treatment planning is all mutual relationship. So this should not come to any surprise, but this is absolutely a must when we're treating someone from a trauma-informed perspective. Empowerment, voice, and choice. This is when our organization aims to strengthen the staff through training, the client and family members through psychoeducation, and realizes although someone may have been through a particular or specific kind of trauma, that the experience and the response is individual to each particular client and their family members or support system. We have to build upon that. We have to meet them where they are and be able to offer choice in treatment, choice in disclosure, and a voice in advocacy in how it is that they would like to meet this trauma where it is. We also have to consider cultural, historical, and gender issues. We have to move past those stereotypic biases and culturally responsive services, language, leverages. We have to move toward a healing value of traditional cultures, connections, traditions, and recognize that historical trauma is a facet of trauma, and we must address that. Trauma-informed approach is designed, number one, to avoid, re-traumatization. That is number one when we're working with someone who's experienced trauma. We focus on safety first, environmentally, psychologically, whatever that may mean as described by your client to feel safe. And we have to be committed to doing no harm. No harm in that space, no triggering, and no re-traumatization. We have to facilitate participation and meaning involvement of our clients, our families, our trauma survivors. They have to be a part of planning services, programs, treatment, etc. And those components all come together to build this great, beautiful thing of trauma-informed care. So how do we avoid re-traumatization? We hear this quite a bit, that when someone's experienced trauma, we tread very lightly. We know re-traumatization means that we are going to trigger, or that we might take them back to that situation or incident. But how do we avoid that? Well, number one, we use psychoeducation. Tell them that you want to know about these hugely important events, but we don't want to take that experience and make them worse. We want to talk about how trauma affects them, affects their nervous system, how we respond, how when we hear, smell, or taste something, it might take us back to that particular situation. Psychoeducation has to be first and foremost. We don't want to dive into a situation and ask them to tell us about that experience. We want to tell them that there is validation, and we want to normalize responses to trauma. This is quite a big chunk of time that we'll be spending with clients, is psychoeducation. And if they have family members or a support system that are participating in a therapeutic program with them, offer that same psychoeducation to them. Using containment. This is something that I use quite a bit when someone comes in and they have a lot of trauma, complex trauma, or perhaps are struggling a bit, to talk about daily activities because that trauma is just kind of hanging out and they don't know what to do with it. So we identify a receptacle. It could be real, it could be perceived, it could be something that we imagine, but this is a place where they put all these components, and we choose one that we're going to spend that time on that day. It helps them compartmentalize in a healthy way. And it teaches them that we don't have to deal with every single thing on our plate. We choose to be the ones to prioritize what is most important to us at that time. And it really helps them cope in a healthy way. Systemic relaxation, grounding, meditation. These are all things that you certainly can teach clients without any kind of certification. Of course, things like yoga, you need a certification, but certainly you can refer them to yoga, discuss the benefits of yoga. You can teach breathing exercises. You can teach mindfulness in imaginative play, anything to help them relax, be able to think more clearly, and become engaged in the present moment of conversation. Appreciate the struggle of these clients. Validate the struggle of these clients. Make sure that you tell them this is their experience, this is their individual journey. Oftentimes, trauma survivors will compare themselves to other people. Appreciate the individual struggle and find that strength that you can offer to them from a strengths perspective standpoint. When we're talking about using information and psychoeducation, we really want to talk about the biology and trauma response. This is one of the biggest indicators of success and moving forward in treatment with someone who's had a trauma experience. So first, you can frame re-experiencing the event. You can talk about how that could disturb sleep, how that can make them hyper-aroused. You talk about the physiological reactions to extreme stress. You don't have to be well-versed in this. You don't have to be a doctor. You just have to be you have to know about the physical responses to stress. It could be heart palpitations. It could be something that you're referring them to see their doctor. High blood pressure, headaches, changes in women's cycles. All of these are physical reactions to stress. Communicate that treatment and other wellness activities can improve their overall well-being and their trauma response. Therapy, meditation, exercise, yoga, going for a walk. These can help alleviate those symptoms and be able to help this client think more clearly. Discuss traumatic stress symptoms and their physiological components. It doesn't have to be specific to this client's experience. You're just talking wide, you're talking broad, you're talking that these are research-driven components. When someone has experienced a high level of stress, trauma, complex trauma, these are symptoms that they experience most often. We are trying to normalize this for the client. We want to explain the links between traumatic stress and substance use, if it's appropriate. Oftentimes, you may be seeing a client for substance use disorders, but they haven't disclosed a traumatic event. That's okay. We can do psychoeducation around substance use disorder, and we can just wait and ask questions as appropriate about any kind of history. But we want to do it slow, we want to do it methodical, and we want to understand that there is a high likelihood that this individual has experienced some kind of trauma incident. Again, you've heard me say this probably 12 times already. Normalize those trauma symptoms. For example, explain to the clients that their symptoms are normal. They're not a weakness. You'll hear clients say, I'm crazy, I'm damaged, I'm damaged goods, is something that a client said to me not too long ago. They talk about being flawed and that people don't accept them. Really kind of bring them back in and explain the research, the things that have been done to see the characteristics of a trauma response, to normalize that trauma symptom. So how do we begin? So obviously, when we are working in a crisis situation, we're going to start at the very beginning. This is the moment that this person is actively in this incident, this particular situation that is causing trauma. The crisis, when someone is dealing with crisis, what we know is that we are not there in a time of crisis to figure out the problem, to figure out what has happened to escalate the problem. What we're there to do is to get them down to about the closest that we can get to normal and functioning for them. This is not time sensitive. This is a particular point in time where we're actively engaged in a client who is experiencing a crisis. We want to make them safe, and we want to refer them to resources. Then when we get to that resource, let's say that you're a clinician, you are going to begin therapy by building rapport, going back to those components of trauma-informed care, establishing trustworthiness, all of those foundations that we need to build a healthy therapeutic relationship. If we begin therapy by focusing on the trauma story, the risk is high that they will be re-traumatized, and it will add injury to the pain that they're already feeling. The early work should be focused on restoring their sense of safety, their connection, their sense of belonging. Their identity even is often one of the marks of restoring that safety. Helping the survivor to discover their strengths, drawing on their own resources, establishing or reconnecting with their support system, and self-regulation. None of these are trauma specific. None of these skills do you have to work on only after you hear their story. These are skills that you can instill while we are patiently waiting for an appropriate time for them to share their story. Only after a client has been able to achieve a reduction in alertness, and we're not asking their symptoms to be completely gone, them to be symptomatic free for an X period of time. We're going to monitor and see a reduction in alertness in their trauma response. We want to see a strengthened awareness of coping skills, their access to resources, using their resources. Then and only then should we consider directly dealing with the trauma story and asking for more information. You're the monitor of that. And it's also something that we need to be very transparent with. We need to engage our clients in that conversation. They are going to self-report their feelings of symptoms and alertness. You're going to ask them questions about their readiness to move forward. This is not something we decide on our own. This is something we decide mutually with our clients. This preparation reduces the odds that reviewing the trauma will cause emotional flooding and re-traumatization. And by asking them and preparing them, that can give them a sense if they're ready or not. Trauma is complex in its impacts and their symptoms and the way that we respond. Therefore, treatment has to be complex. We have to be ready with multiple skills, multiple communications, and multiple responses. We need to strengthen various aspects of their overall well-being, their social skills, their spiritualness, their cognitive ability, their physical symptoms, their emotional readiness, and overall self-regulation. So rule number one, as we're slowly moving through, rule number one is do no harm. We said that in the beginning when we were looking at the components of trauma-informed care. Affirm what the client is experiencing and how they are trying to make sense of it. So what are we doing here? We're really asking them about the story, and we're making pauses. Throughout the story, we want to ask them, how does that make you feel? What has happened in this particular situation? How do you make sense of that? You want to monitor how it is that they're perceiving this particular trauma incident. You want to affirm them as an individual and the strength, the courage that they've had in dealing with all these forces in their life and how they are able to go on from here. Many of those trauma survivors that you'll be working with may say, I just can't do it. I'm not ready. I can't go on. They may not be suicidal, but they may just be giving up. This is where you're going to affirm that strength that they've had to this point and their strength to move forward. Offer your client a safe place where they can heal themselves in that safe place. And one of the best analogies that has ever come up is here below, like putting a cast on a broken leg. The cast is to protect the leg from further damage. The cast does not do the healing. The leg gets protection so it can use its own processes to heal itself. And that's what I think about our jobs being. We are that cast. We're protecting, we're providing some guidance, but it really is that client that will heal itself with our help, with our support, with our guidance, as long as we're using trauma-informed skills to do so. So when we talk about how we create this environment, it is incredibly simple to read, but unfortunately, so many agencies don't put these things into practice. So number one, environment of care. So often we walk into a nonprofit or a government run facility, and what we notice first is the appearance, the smell, the sight. Now think about some of the agencies that you may have been in, and how did you feel? Did you feel welcome? Did you feel warm? Did you feel supported? Did you feel safe? Did you feel secure? And when I started asking myself that, a lot of times my answer would be no. There was a distinct, stale neutrality that existed in how it was decorated. There was often a smell that wasn't pleasant, or too much of a smell that was overwhelming. Lots of times we walk to spaces that are not clean, they're not well maintained. Even approaching a building, overgrown bushes, not cared for in the front area, that speaks volumes to someone who desperately wants to have a safe place. We want soothing colors. We want nice, simple decor and paint. And I know that these things aren't always easy. It seems like we have to jump through hoops to paint our offices or for our lobby to be painted, but these are things that the organization needs to push for to do those very simple tasks that provide trauma-informed care for our clients. Overall quiet, sound machines, soft music. These provide two things. Number one is that ambient music, but it also protects confidentiality. Carefully placed psychoeducation information. Oftentimes brochures that are out in the middle of a table where everyone can see who's taken what are not ever taken with the client. We want to make sure that they're available yet discreet, so someone can take information without being judged by those other patrons and clients in that facility of what it is they're taking. Neutral or pleasant aroma. Again, Oftentimes there is a overwhelming smell where someone is using diffusers or candles or some kind of just distinct smell. Others, it's stale, it's musty. We often use older buildings. Be very aware of these kinds of things. Individual chairs with discrete seating options, someone who may want to come in and isolate themselves from the others in the lobby, may not sit right next to someone. A clear and welcoming entry sign, a clear and welcoming space when they come in, a very easy way to find who it is they check in with if we're looking at a clinic space. Individual bathroom options. I never really thought about this until I had a client who was sitting in the lobby of an agency who got very overwhelmed, had an anxiety attack, and went to seek a bathroom. But the bathroom that was an option for her was 3 stalls. There was doors on the stalls, but she was very upset about who may hear her. She was sobbing. She didn't want to be asked if she was okay. She was using her skills to get through this anxiety attack. What she really wanted to feel very safe was an individual bathroom. And that's something to consider. I know we can't always change our space that drastically, but it's something to consider and talk with our clients about. Staff appearance. This should be, more common sense than it appears that it is. Good general hygiene. This is something that we want to present, that we want to be professional. We want to have attire that looks professional. It's easy to identify staff members versus just someone coming and going, whether it's a lanyard with a name tag or a polo shirt with the name of the agency, something to easily identify a staff member. Particularly for that client I told you about that was looking for a restroom. She was wanting to tell someone that she was there, that was a staff member, to come get her therapist, but she wasn't sure who in the hallway coming and going actually worked there. There was no lanyard, no identification, no nothing. So she was actively seeking a staff member to get her therapist, but couldn't really figure out who was a staff member. Clothing that fits appropriately, not overly revealing. And yes, we don't want to take away your autonomy and independence in choosing what it is that you wear, but do realize that those who have had some kind of trauma related to sexual inappropriateness, sexual assault, etc., the revealing clothes may be a trigger for them. I had a client whose clothes were ripped off of her. She was very aggressively assaulted. And so to her, if she would always wear clothes that were higher on the neck, she didn't want to see that area at all. So it is highly likely that she could be triggered by someone who had a plunging neckline. So these are things that we have to think about. Religious icons, political icons, discrete jewelry choices. Think about how you arrange your room and your office and what kind of things that you display there. Again, the idea is not to take away your opinion and your autonomy in having these things displayed, but just be very cautious about what it is and what it could mean to someone. I have a colleague who has lots of pictures in her office, as we all do, her children, her animals, things of that nature. And she was seeing a client for marital issues. And she noticed that her client would not stop looking at her desk area. And so she didn't look at it while she was with the client, but she kind of analyzed her desk area after her client left, and thought the only thing there was her computer and some pictures of her family. And so she decided the next time to remove those pictures and anything other than her computer on her desk. When the lady came back in for the next appointment, she was a little bit upset. She was a little put off. And so my friend asked her, "Why is it that you seem a little overwhelmed today?" And she said, "I was really looking forward to seeing those pictures there. I was really looking forward to seeing those pictures there. I really enjoyed looking at those pictures. It gave me a lot of hope." So in that conversation, asking very minimal questions, it led to this particular lady disclosing that she had had some miscarriages. She had longed for a family, and her husband did not want to discuss any kind of alternatives to pregnancy. So that really was a trigger for her. Seeing that family and see that idealization that she really wanted became a trigger for her. Staff behavior. Far too often, I think we forget, when we're not in our offices, when we're in our lobby, our hallway, maybe in the elevator, even in the parking lot, we're still in eye shot of our clients. They see how we're handling ourselves. They see how we're interacting with each other. And we want to be very aware of these kinds of things. We want to demonstrate proper manners and respect for one another. We want to respond to requests for help, even if it's not our client. If we have someone in the hallway who's asking directions or seems to be having a really challenging time, we want to check in with them. We want to do it quietly. We want to do it as discreetly as possible, but we're not doing them any favors by just continuing to mind our business and going on to wherever it is we were going. We want to speak in clear, normal tones. Oftentimes we find ourselves speaking differently, using different language, different adjectives, speaking softer or louder when we're dealing with someone with trauma. We want to make eye contact when it's appropriate. This is where our cultural competence comes in. We have to know the clients that we're working with. And if you don't know, ask. Oftentimes we see ourselves as a social worker extraordinaire and that we should know everything about every culture, and we don't. And we just need to ask those questions. Would you like me to give you a handshake? Is it okay if I make eye contact with you? Can you tell me a little bit about what is culturally preferred for you? That's a simple question that gets a lot of that out of the way. I know that we have rough days, we have hard clients, we work in agencies where we might feel unappreciative, but still smiling and demonstrating a pleasant demeanor means the world to clients, especially when they're struggling with trauma. Be very mindful of confidentiality in open common spaces such as the lobby. Oftentimes those who are administrative secretaries, billing, HR, they are there up front and they're managing clients coming in, and oftentimes those conversations are said very loud. There's information that is given that should not be given, and those things can really cause a negative trauma response. Open physical stance makes sure that we're keeping in mind our nonverbal gestures and our body language, keeping our nodding and make sure that our nonverbal skills are there. Initiate greetings, offer water, don't eat in front of clients. I know oftentimes we have back-to-back days and we had an emergency and we're just getting down to eat something, but it's not appropriate to do that with our clients. And I know that many of you are probably thinking, these are so simple and these are things that I clearly don't do, but so many do. And that's why we're talking about them today. Be open to change, be open to constructive feedback in how it is that you are working with clients. That cultural competence again, and nonverbal gestures and staff conversations. I've had so many clients over here, conversations between staff. And they feel as though that might be happening about them, where staff is talking about someone in the lobby or a client that they just saw, and my clients are wondering, wow, are they doing that about me? So we want to make sure that that's not happening. From an organizational perspective, we have to make sure that trauma-informed care is important, that there is a trauma policy and philosophy in place organizationally, that there is a procedure and a policy that is available for the employees, that there is training that is available. There has to be a commitment that is articulated to be trauma informed from the top down. All staff, clients, family member supports are taught about trauma and its impact. It's hard to be trauma informed if you're not given the appropriate tools to be effective and be able to teach this. Incorporate a universal trauma screening for all clients, period. It doesn't matter if they say or don't say that there has been a trauma experience. It doesn't mean that you have to know or you don't know that there's been a trauma experience. This is universally given to every client that comes into your agency. Trauma status continually assessed. Many times clients, when given a trauma screening, they know what's being asked and they're not ready to disclose. So their answer may be no, no, no. So periodically, we're going to check in about trauma. We're going to ask questions about trauma, because after we've offered this safe and healthy and secure environment, there might be a disclosure, but we have to assess for that and we have to give them the space to talk about it. There has to be a clear organizational plan for dealing with behavioral crisis. I cannot say how many agencies that I've consulted with that there is no safety plan for staff. There is no staff or administrative policy on dealing with a behavioral crisis, period. That has to be in place. There has to be discrete areas in your organization for calming clients or for crisis management. These are areas that are truly trauma informed, from the environment to the staff dealing with this issue. Feedback valued. So oftentimes we give our clients surveys and we ask about how we're doing. Well, it doesn't matter if we give the survey and we ask if we don't incorporate that into some of our policies and how we do business. We have to have concerted efforts to reach these clients where they want to be met. And I have just some helpful links throughout here. When you guys are able to access the PowerPoint, I think would be a very valuable resource for you. Treatment considerations reflect the client's preferences. That could be from their cultural traditions and beliefs to where they want to work first. They're integrated across the disciplines. We have to have a multidisciplinary approach when we're working with a survivor of trauma. Consent for treatment is explained far too often, even in our non-trauma informed care environments. We are not explaining the treatment consent exchange forms. This has to be fully explained to be able to work in a multidisciplinary way. Offer choice of treatment provider when possible. Sometimes it is just who you represent that causes a barrier between the client and being able to work on trauma. It could be me as a white female is triggering to my client. I don't need them to tell me that, but I need to ask a question. Are you okay with me as your provider? We have other alternatives if someone else would be a better fit for you. I'm not asking them to tell me what's wrong. I'm not asking them to explain to me why I'm not a good fit. I'm giving them choice in being able to choose a provider they feel most comfortable with. We have to realize that it's not about us, it's about perhaps what I represent for them in their trauma story. Using everyday language, staying away from acronyms, therapeutic language without explanation, etc. Respond to all statements of abuse. This is oftentimes a way that someone is trying to make a disclosure that happened maybe previously, and they're making this statement of abuse about the present day. It could not be factual at all, or it very well could be factual and it's ongoing abuse, and we have to take all statements very seriously. We have to be sensitive to the seating configuration of our office, the proximity of us sitting with them. If you're conducting family therapy, make sure you have options for seating. You want to be able to allow the client and the family members to sit where they're most comfortable and with the distance that they would like. Co-occurring treatment needs assessed. You need to look at co-occurring disorders along with trauma and make sure you specialize or can refer to a specialization in that area. Again, culture of origin respected and incorporated into the planning. Recognize the importance of physical boundaries. Offer to them a handshake. If they say no, that's fine, move on. Offer a high five, offer no touch at all. Just make sure that they are a part of that decision making. We have to realize that oftentimes trauma survivors feel so much out of control that even a very small choice can be a big deal to the trauma survivor. Recognize the importance of social boundaries, joke telling, storytelling, innuendo. These can convey risk or threat, or it can be taken in a way that obviously you didn't intend, or it could be overheard and there's no communication with you all. And now that joke or that innuendo has been taken as that person perceives it, and that could be really dangerous. So one of the things that I want you to walk away from this training today, if the only thing, is this slide right here. This is probably the most important question in how you frame it. This trauma-informed is a shift in how we ask questions. We're going from what's wrong with you to asking what has happened to you. And you can see just in that slight change of language, we're really taking any ownership off of that client. What has happened to you? It means something has been put upon you. What's wrong with you can sometimes convey ownership or blame. And so just that simple way of asking a question is a huge way to start your trust and your rapport with your client. And you can see here the trauma-informed wheel, as I call it. All of these things, again, are part of the components that we talked about early on. And I have shared this with my clients before, and I've talked about what each one of those circles means and what I'm going to do as their clinician in meeting each one of those. And I asked them to engage with me and tell me what it is that they could do in each one of these circles where we can have a really healthy relationship in moving forward. This sets a precedent that we are working on trauma, maybe without talking about the specific trauma at that time, and that I am going to provide these particular things to them, and mutually, they're going to provide these things to themselves. Building resiliency. There's a toolkit that is awesome. It's based off of ACEs. There's a link there for you. But I want to talk just for a second about secondary traumatic stress. So when we're working in this environment where we're dealing with trauma and crisis so often, it behooves us to make sure that the number one priority is us. This is where we get to be a little bit selfish. It takes me back to something that a lot of our grandmas used to say: if you don't love yourself, then no one else is going to love you, right? Well, the same goes for here. If we don't care for ourselves first, we're not going to be able to care for those that are coming in with trauma and other related issues. We have to be intentional about vicarious trauma. We have to have an organizational stand that makes support available for all the employees. There has to be a recognition of the impact on secondary trauma. This is huge. And more often than not, recently, I've been asked to speak about secondary trauma and what that looks like as a social worker or helping professional. This is huge right now, especially coming out of a 14-month pandemic. Recognizing exposure to trauma is a risk of the job serving traumatized children and families, and it should be acknowledged. There's nothing worse than being told it's just part of your job. You signed up for this. No, you signed up to be supported and to be maintained as a valuable worker within this job. Understand that trauma can shape the culture of organizations in the same way that trauma shapes the individuals that we're working with. Think about morale. Think about the lack of support versus a lot of support. It changes the culture and the environment in which we work. Develop the capacity to translate trauma-related organizations and knowledge into meaningful, action-oriented policy, and improve that practice within the organization as a whole. Not just a few units, not just a few departments, not just a few people, but as a whole, so that it is known that there is that support and there's a capacity to realize the symptoms and the exposure of trauma. be integrated into direct services, programs, policies, all of it. Like I just said, the whole shebang. It has to be training facilitation. There has to be staff development. There has to be activities directed at secondary traumatic stress. If we don't talk about it and we don't acknowledge it, then as an employee, you often feel like it doesn't exist and it's taboo for you to bring it up. Okay. This is a really, really good organizational chart about trauma-informed care. Again, it has to start at the top. The senior leaders must prioritize trauma-informed care. They demonstrate it through offering training, through their behavior. They model that for their employees. They give priority to trauma-informed care. Then it goes to support staff. They're given training, coaching, supervision, debriefing, everything around trauma and crisis. And they discuss work-life balance, self-care, things that really start to incorporate that coping ability. That translates into listening more effectively and actively to the clients and families. Clients and families are consulted and included in their own self-care plans. And you see how this works. There's a nice flow. The leaders are able to recognize it. They're passing that off to staff. Staff is healthy in a good place, feeling very supported. They pass that on to the families. And then that is passed on to a data or non-judgmental regulated share with staff and used to motivate continued improvement. So this is a cycle. It continues. And then we continue to align our policy and practice of trauma-informed care organization-wide. In the organization, a few things that we do want to incorporate as we're looking at policy is adequate clinical supervision, making sure there's time to debrief, to process, reflect. This is where we really are able to talk about and process our trauma, our cases, our clients, our workload. We want to maintain a trauma caseload balance, making sure that just because somebody's really good with this population, they're not carrying all of the trauma survivor caseload. We want to support workplace, peer-related self-care groups. We want to enhance the physical safety of our staff, offering flexible scheduling, caseload caps. We want secondary traumatic stress training for our clinical staff, our administrative staff, all of our staff, our clinical staff, our non-clinical staff. Everyone needs to understand. Train our organizational leaders, let me back up, on organizational implementation and assessment. How am I able to incorporate trauma-informed care into my organization? It sounds like a really great idea, but how do I do it? We need to make sure there's an assessment there. And providing an ongoing assessment of staff risk and resiliency. For yourself, without your organization being involved, use supervision, consult with a colleague, make sure that you're processing with someone appropriate. Increase your self-awareness. Oftentimes, we don't want to be aware of what secondary traumatic stress looks like for fear that we are feeling it. Maintain your healthy work-life balance. And I know that those are so easy words to say, but it's harder to do. And think what I'm asking here is that you guys just become aware of it. Exercise, good nutrition, sleeping, staying connected, particularly staying connected with your friends and family who are not in the helping profession. That does wonders for my self-care. Develop and implement plans of personal wellness, resiliency. Take a risk and resiliency inventory for yourself. We're so good at giving them to our clients. Take one yourself. Do a self-awareness wheel. Start looking at how you're doing and not just asking clients how they're doing. Look at risk reduction, how self-care routines are working or not working. Use your EAP. And if you can, participate in a buddy system, someone that you work with, someone that is a colleague, to make sure that you're holding each other accountable. So screening tools, we don't have the time to get into these today, but I did want to provide you guys with some resources. These are some of my favorites, some that are widely used, particularly in outpatient types of settings. And then treatment for trauma, just a few trauma-focused CBT is evidence-based. I know a lot of you work in agencies where you have to have an evidence-based practice. It's components-based treatment model that incorporates trauma-sensitive intervention with CBT. It brings in family. It's proven successful with children and adolescents. This is one of the hardest populations to reach when we're talking about trauma and all of the hormonal changes, developmental phases that this age group is going through. This has been proven to be very, very successful. This works for complex trauma, a single event trauma, or multiple traumas in their life. EMDR, this is something that I know many of you are probably familiar with. However, the caveat here is no one just needs to go to EMDR. What needs to happen, and there needs to be some monitoring, there needs to be some disclosure, there needs to be readiness to talk about and process the trauma event. So this is something that's highly successful, but we don't just assess for trauma, find out there's been trauma, and throw our client into EMDR. This is very much for someone who is working with a therapist, and we are making sure that they are actively ready for EMDR and to retell their story. So these are, again, some helpful resources. There are a lot of these out there. The links that I provided to you guys are all toolkits, evidence-based work here. There's some continuing education there in the first link, but I just wanted to provide some more information for you guys, for you to go into a little bit more depth with trauma. And that is going to conclude my piece for today. I hope that I was on time. I tend to like to talk a little bit too much, so I think I'm on time, and I appreciate all of you being here and for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Garino, for your presentation. I think we have a few questions in the chat, and
Sure.
And so I ask them now. So what are some tips on how to apply these? What are some tips on how to apply these tips when the person is already in crisis mode? They may not be able to listen or reason as effectively. And I think that question came up earlier in your presentation. So
yes. So when someone's in active crisis, we obviously are not going to ask them to tell the story. You then are just dealing with that crisis. When you think about a crisis or someone being in crisis, it is present moment only. We're not going to talk about their relationship with their mom when they were 5. We're not going to talk about 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks in the future. We are present in that moment, and we're with that client as they're going through this crisis. So we're only focused on just that crisis and the symptoms of that crisis, if that makes sense. So if someone is experiencing, I'm trying to think about a good story to use. If someone is experiencing self-harm, they're not suicidal, and we know that that has a direct correlation to previous trauma, and this is the crisis at hand, is that they're self-harming, they've never self-harmed before, we're not going to ask that client to engage in discussion about trauma. We're going to give psychoeducation. We're going to assess the self-harm that's happening in that moment and resource whatever is the most appropriate action for that self-harm, keeping them de-escalated or de-escalate them from where they are, and just monitor that moment. I hope that helps.
okay. All right. The next question we have is, many older people have long-standing unaddressed trauma and are now experiencing cognitive disorders. Do you have some techniques that might be used in these situations? Often behaviors, quote unquote, are mistaken for coping.
Right. And you know, the very unique piece of that question is oftentimes behaviors are coping skills that have been learned throughout their interaction with others from the time they experience the trauma. There's many aging adults that experienced trauma 40, 50 years ago. The unfortunate part about that with the aging process and distortion in their memories, the the story is not going to be the story that it really was. I know that was a very strange way to get to that point. So oftentimes you, again, very much like someone in crisis, have to stay with them in that moment. So if they're displaying behaviors, we don't think about asking a aging adult, why are you doing that? That seems like such a childish or adolescent question. Why are you behaving this way? But oftentimes that is the best conduit of information. It's just simply asking, why are you having these behaviors? Why are you slapping the pills out of your nurse's hand? And although you might not get a great story of what happened to them 30 years ago, it gives you that trust between they just want to tell a story. It may not be the accurate story, but they just want to tell a story. And I've had aging adults say, I'm just mad. And so we talk about feeling angry. And a lot of times it has a direct correlation to the trauma, but it's more in the terms of, I don't feel independent. I don't feel autonomous. I don't feel like I have the ability to make decisions. And, the nurse just coming in and telling me to take these pills, I just slapped them out of her hand because it felt good. So that's where you stay with the aging adult. There are some that have a really good recollection, although we would never know if it's true or not, about a trauma event. And again, whether it is real or perceived, factual or not, sometimes just offering them that space to tell you the story is symptom relief enough for that aging adult. They likely don't have the support system that they did. Maybe family members are deceased. Some of them are seeing their supports and their friends be buried. And so it's very lonely. And oftentimes they just want to tell a story. And it's not our job to be the fact checker on it, but just allow them to tell the story. And you might see some behaviors decrease, some negative behaviors decrease once they're able to process and vent that story with you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but does anyone else have any questions? I think we have about 3 minutes left, so just a few minutes, but if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. If you feel comfortable taking your mic off or turning your mic on, or turning your camera on, then you can do that as well.
Hey, Tadra, this is Kevin. Actually, I saw a message in the chat, and I was going to just let Michelle know this, and maybe she may want to respond on it. It says a friend in another state who counsels people in crisis is required by her county to have a relationship with a personal therapist and see that therapist at least once a year. And I just thought I would ask you your response on that. To me, it sounds great, but I just thought
yeah. It does sound great because, I'm going to give you kind of my personal opinion. Where we really see change when we're working with someone who's had a trauma experience, we're about the 12-month mark. That's really where you start to see commitment to change. That could obviously change from person to person. That also sounds like there could be a situation where this person has found themselves in criminal court, and because that is not the good place for someone who's experienced trauma, there might be a bench order or a court order for them to participate in some kind of treatment programming for up to a year or more in lieu of being charged. And we see that a lot in North Carolina. I work with our court system, those who have mental health concerns, those who've experienced trauma and have had some symptoms that result in poor decision-making or criminality will often advocate with the judge presiding and say, can they enter into therapy in lieu of criminal charges? And that is very successful. And there is a time stamp on that. North Carolina does not have any kind of just arbitrary, without them being criminally involved, kind of stamps of time for someone to participate in therapy. However, I think that's an excellent point. I know that some of my programs that I've built for gang involved kids, because the time for change is really about 12 months. I ask them to participate for 12 months. And if they don't participate for the full 12 months and they decide that they want to get out of the program, they have to start over at 12 months, because really, or at month 1 for 12 months, because really when you start to see that change is at that 12-month mark. So I'm not real sure what state and what kind of criteria.
Michelle?
Yes.
Michelle, that was not what I was saying. I have a
Oh,
friend
okay.
who's got a master's degree in counseling, and she counsels in the school system. And as part of her job requirement, they require that she maintain a relationship with a therapist and see that therapist once a year. And I know North Carolina is probably not moving to
Got
that,
it.
but I think since there is money now, that needs to be
Yeah.
examined, because you can't really treat people if you're hurting.
Exactly. Yes, that makes more sense now, but it was very interesting either way. But I do think that we need some kind of, I don't know if it would be a policy or what. I think we really need to look at the availability of therapy for those who are giving therapy. Right now, it's just, I'll go see one if I need one. There needs to be that commitment to have a place to process. And really, honestly, after you get your license, I mean, you have that, post 2 years of work where you're getting that weekly supervision. After that, when you're fully licensed, when you probably need it the most, there is nothing that's holding us accountable to that therapy. And Lisa, I love that. And I think we need to incorporate that. So anybody that's doing lobbying and that kind of work, I see peer support. Yes, peer support is a great thing. Unfortunately, peer support teams are more widely available for law enforcement and first responders. One of the driving forces behind peer support teams is the fire departments in North Carolina. They have a wonderful, wonderful program of peer support. And then we have what's called CISM teams, it's crisis intervention teams that are deployed when there's been a pretty major incident to go out to first responders and us as helping professionals and debrief us as people who were not directly tied to that event. So there are resources, but we don't, I wish we had more, I guess is the best way to end that note.
Yes. Yes. I see there are comments in the chat about we lose great social workers in CPS and APS because of untreated secondary trauma and burnout. Absolutely.
All the time.
I can imagine. So I think we're at 3:17 now, but if anyone has maybe a question for Ms. Garino, please feel free to type it in the chat. She may have time to answer maybe one more, even though we're already over time. But it seems like this presentation has been very helpful to a lot of people. So we want to make sure that if you have any questions that you have time to answer or get answers for your questions. All right, I don't think we have any more at this time. Thank you, Ms. Garino, for presenting to us this afternoon. It was a great presentation, very timely given the pandemic and all the things that have happened this past year. So thank you so much for being willing to join us today.
You're welcome. Thank you,
Tandra and Michelle, for both your presentation. It was a wonderful job. And we saw lots of great comments in the chat saying, wonderful presentation. I think we're going to have you back next year. Hopefully we'll be in person so that we can have you. I think you can talk on secondary trauma probably for a whole nother hour as well. So I think we, for the conference committee, I think we already have a topic for next year already.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to. I love face-to-face so much better than virtual, but kudos to you guys for continuing to hold this, and thank you guys for everyone who attended.
Thank you. And as we do wrap up today, we do have several things we want to talk about before we end for the day, and to give you some reminders as we do go into our final day for tomorrow. So remember, tomorrow morning, you will get another link or another email from Allison Crossman giving you the link for the day's session. Remember, that link is your individual link, so do not forward that to anyone else, but use it for your own self. And you may have put it on your calendar as well. We have several reminders. I just want to thank, first of all the speakers from today. We had wonderful presentations. We had lots of great questions from you all in the audience. We want to appreciate and thank you for being a part of that. I want to again thank our sponsors today, AARP for helping us do financial support to make this conference free of charge, and the North Carolina Senior Medicare Patrol Program. Also, all the board members that are on board, from Pam Palmer, our treasurer, to Laura Schlabach, who is our secretary, and Elmore with the Secretary of State's office. She and Tadra are conference co-chairs, and we appreciate all that they have done. John Mary and Stephanie Bias with our not communications, but with educating folks and awareness. Nancy Warren, who is our past president, and she also does advocacy. And let's see, who am I leaving out? Autumn Cox. I just want to say a wonderful thank you to Autumn. As you probably saw in the chat feature, Autumn has already got all the presentations from today already loaded onto our website, and she has done a tremendous job. And I just want to thank her. And she also noted in that chat feature that she will have the recordings up as soon as possible. That does take a little time for her to get those loaded up with all the features. And I failed to mention Laura Cockman, who is our chair. She could not be with us for the conference, but we want to thank her for all that she does for us. Without her, we wouldn't have such a great board already. But I want to appreciate that. And again, I'm looking at the chat real quick because Allison made a comment to everybody. Remember, the conference link is unique to you, so please do not share it, as it will impact your ability to earn CEUs. Your link is the same for all 3 days. Therefore, you can use the link that's right now for tomorrow, but you'll also get that email tomorrow as well. Couple of final things. Remember our NCP3A website. Just know that you're welcome to go there and check out membership information, learn how that you would like to get involved and become on the board, even potentially become a board member. So we would love to have you as well. I know that we have others that were on the committee for the education committee. Tomorrow I'll talk more about those individuals, Paula Cohort, Roger Manis, Catherine Lanier from the Department of Health and Human Services with the Division of Age and Adult Services. All of those folks have been of tremendous help in getting this getting this conference off the ground and getting it on board. So thank you very much. Final thoughts and reminders. We've had a great day. I can't believe, I know that there's always some technical glitches. Even when you're at an in-person conference, we still have things that may happen behind the scenes. And but I know when it's a virtual conference, things may happen more, live, and you may see those. But just know that this has been a very successful day. I know that at one time we had more than 160 people at one given time on the conference. So this has been a great job. Oh, and I forgot to mention Meredith Stone Smith with the UNC School of Government. She was also on our education committee. Thank you, Ann Elmore, for throwing that list out to me. So again, we are going to end here at just a little early for today, but we do want to remind you, join us tomorrow morning, 9:30 sharp. We want to start on time so that we can get it kicked off, as we have some more wonderful speakers tomorrow, and you'll learn about more great subject matters, and then more wonderful breakout sessions as well. And also, Ann has reminded me, I can't forget, I got to mention Dr. Karen Bullock with the UNC School of Social Work that helped us out with the education part as well. So again, thank you for today's sessions and for attending. We hope to see you tomorrow, and have a great day. Thank you.